What's up, everyone? In this video, I want to go through the node called write Unreal attributes. So I made this node to streamline the process of writing Unreal Engine relevant attributes when you import your geometry through the Houdini engine inside it. So the setup is pretty simple. What I have here, I'm writing a couple of first of all, I'm having this first. I'm running through the loop, but this loop is set as a single pass, and I just have these basically 6 boards. Let's say I want to import the geometry inside Houdini. Inside Unreal Engine, how would I go about it? Of setting up all the materials and also collisions, that we can also write collisions with this node. How we would go about it. So the setup is pretty simple, so this doesn't really have to do anything with the node, but I do write some vertex colors, which I'm going to use them inside the shader to kind of highlight the edges of the geometry. And then one thing that has to do something with this node is the writing of the piece attribute. So I have set up my piece attribute as piece 0 and 1, and I have just selected like 3 boards for piece 0 and 3 and the rest of them as a piece 1. And this is going to be relevant when we are writing some collisions on it. So that's going to be a little bit later. But let's go ahead and go through this node in order to see how we can set it up. And basically what I'm doing I'm writing these attributes, I connect the geometry, and I'm just using the file cache node to save out the geometry, and I'm just going to show it how it materializes inside Unreal Engine when I'm actually importing it inside there. So let's go ahead and start writing some attributes. So first of all, we can write some attributes. So what attributes you want to write? So there are a bunch of attributes that we can write, but there are a very common attributes that you want to write, and we have to look at some like attributes and groups help page on side effects website. Basically, these are all the attributes that you can set that Houdini engine is going to recognize when you import your geometry inside Unreal Engine. So there's a bunch of them, and you can basically read through all of them, but most of them are not really. A lot of them are just for landscapes and all that, and many of them are very specific. But if we talk about generally, there are a bunch of very common ones that we need to set to import our geometry predictably inside Unreal Engine. And these have already been set as a drop-down menu for this HDA. So what I did is basically what I have experienced, what kind of attributes I needed to set to basically set the correct name of the geometry inside the content browser and the location where to bake it, basically the folder inside content browser, and a couple of other attributes that are important for when you actually bake out your geometry and detach it from the Houdini engine. All of these attributes are basically set up inside here already, but that doesn't mean that you can only set these up. You can basically just if you want to your own custom attribute, you just go ahead and write your attribute here. You can just go ahead and copy from the help page any of these attributes and write it inside here. But if you want to get the already set up, you can go ahead and use them here, or you can just go ahead and add your own inside this menu. You can see I have set it up inside here. And one thing to note that to know which type of the attribute I should set, you can see that there is a prim detail. Basically, in parentheses, I have given the type of the attribute that this should be. Because if you go to the help page, you can see that there is an owner column, which basically says which type of attribute should be set. So you see that Unreal Bake folder should be only primitive or detail attribute set on geometry. So that's important. So it's pretty hard to remember all of the different types that you should set every attribute at. So that's why I went ahead and put it in parentheses to know which type of the class this attribute should be. So basically you can select either write point, primitive, or detail, and then you can also select the type, integer, float, integer, string, or float. And this again is all described in the help page of the type of the attribute that you want to set. So that covers kind of the basics of how we can get our attributes. Now let's go ahead and set these attributes. So first of all, if we want we want to give our mesh name, our mesh that we're going to bake out inside Unreal Engine, a unique name inside the content browser. So what you have to do is set the Unreal output name attribute. That's going to be, you see under the tab, you see that this can be any class. So I'm going to put it in the primitive class, and it's going to be string attribute. And since I have unique name for this mesh already as my name attribute on it, so what I'm going to do is just going to append the SM prefix and use the name attribute value on this geometry. So let's go ahead and say SM, and then it's going to use the prims expression, and that's going to surface 0, primitive 0. So since all of these are the same, each primitive holds the same value, I can just go ahead and say primitive number 0, use the name. And that's basically it. We have set up our SM with platform 0. You can see Unreal attribute, Unreal output name attribute has been set, and it's a primitive attribute. Okay, and now also I want to give a location where I want to bake it out. In this case, I want to bake it out in my test bake folder. I'm just going to copy this path from the content browser inside Unreal Engine. Go ahead inside here, Unreal Bake folder. And you can see in this case, this has to be the primitive or detail attribute. So let's go ahead and put the primitive and paste it inside. And one thing that you might have noticed that I pasted the raw. Basically, I just went ahead and copied it from the content browser, and the content browser also uses the all. It prefixes the path with the all because of the way that file structure is generated. But inside the Houdini, I should know. Basically, my relative path where I want to save the geometry should always start with the game. But since there's a little bit extra logic inside the HDA, it basically recognizes that the path that I have pasted inside here prefixes with all, and it has automatically removed it from here, so that you don't have to do it manually inside here, and that you do not even have to remember that this, if you would save it out as this string, it would actually not work. So we basically, inside the internal logic, we automatically remove the prefix all, and this is going to work nicely for us to bake it out. So these are two attributes that are most important for the actual location and the name of the geometry. And now I want to set up my material. So let's go ahead and go to the Unreal material. Let's go ahead and say what I want to set up. Let's go to these. I have this material. Let's take a look at this one. Actually, these are basically the same. Let's go ahead and take this material, this walkway. Just go ahead and say copy reference. Go back here and paste it inside. And again, because I basically the tool recognized that I went ahead and pasted the raw path that the Houdini, that Unreal Engine gives me with the script engine material instance constant prefix. The tool recognized it and basically stripped out all the unnecessary parts of the path to this material, and you can see that Unreal Material now basically always starts with the game tutorial and all of these. So it's stripped out the prefixes, all of these, because if we would use the this value as a raw paste, again the Houdini engine would not recognize this path. So it's very good for me to add this because it just streamlines the way that we can sign these materials without us not having to manually delete all of these. And we can also assign the groups to these, basically the parts of the geometry, different materials. That's going to be a little bit later. But that's it for this basic setup. I'm going to go ahead and save it to disk. And to showcase it, what I'm going to do is basically, you can see this test bake is empty. I'm going to go ahead and, because I do not want to use any like HDA to import the geometry, just for demonstration, I'm just going to take this geometry and drag it inside the content browser. And if we wait a bit, and you can see this geometry has been automatically placed inside the test bake folder, which we set up with our attributes, and also the static mesh wood platform 0 has been automatically set its value because we set this value inside here. So that's already two things that we do not have to do inside the Unreal Engine. It's been automatically set up. Let's say I want to add two materials on the geometry. Maybe I want to add these two different colors for these boards. So what I want to do is go ahead and open up this material. I'm going to make it a little bit darker than this one that we set up. You see this one is going to be a little bit darker. Let me save it and let me copy this reference. Let's go back to the Houdini and let's set the materials based on our piece attribute. Go to the Unreal materials, and in the group, I'm just going to use the group that I have set up inside here. So what I'm going to use is at piece equals 0 and at piece equals, okay, let me paste this attribute inside here, equals 1. So let's go ahead and save it to disk inside Unreal Engine. What I'm going to do is open up the static mesh and going to go ahead and press this re-import mesh. Just press on it, and we have. Let me delete this one. You can see now our geometry has been applied to different materials on it, the darker one and the lighter one based on the group that I selected for it. So this is how you can add different materials on it. So that's very quick how we can set up our Unreal materials. Let's talk about the collisions because right now we do not have them. So the idea is that we can write collisions with the tool, and this is where the second input is important. But the collisions are pretty involved and how they are being created through the Houdini engine. It's little confusing at first, but at the most basic part of it, that we can use our original geometry as a guide for our collision, and these are basically called the rendered collisions. If you take a look at the basically about help page, it basically talks about the rendered collision, and the prefix rendered means that we are using our initial geometry for collision, and without it means that we are using the custom collision. So this custom collision is usually done through the second input of here, or we can basically copy our original geometry, separate it into the parts, and then use it as basically as a copy of it, as its collision. But that's going to be a little bit later. But let's go ahead and write our simple collision. So when you toggle the right collision, you will see that there is going to be group rendered collision geo simple automatically written because we're using the collision source as apply collision group to input geometry, and in the parentheses it's called rendered. So rendered is most basic collision when we do not create any basically where we do not carry forward any custom collision geometry. Basically what input we have, we are getting our collisions from the same geometry. We do not create any new geometry and use it and carry it on the disk. Do not save any custom collision with us. And the most basic one is the collision geo simple. And what you can do is go ahead and write it. Save to disk, and let's go to the this foot. What I'm going to do is go ahead and say turn on player collision. What I'm going to do is go ahead and press re-import mesh. And if I'm going to re-import it, I should get my collision. You can see automatically it has basically wrapped around this geometry with a simple collision. And I can go ahead and stand on it. So that's cool. So, but what if we have more involved or more custom collision? So this is where maybe, in this case, maybe the source basically is custom, basically using the same geometry just to wrap around it will not work for us. What if I want my custom collision? So let's go back to the Houdini. What you can do is go ahead and let's take some box. And for the demonstration's sake, let's say this is going to be my collision, which are not very accurate collision, but for the demonstration, let's say this is my custom collision. I'm going to go ahead and say connect it to this box and send it. And this tab menu, I'm going to use new collision geometry from input 2. So then we have to again select the collision type. This simple is going to be fine. And let's go ahead and save it. And before save, I want to talk about the kind of a called, I guess I would call it dilemma, because right now we are saving, we can go ahead and preview our collision source. You can see that we basically, if you go ahead and press on this toggle, you can see this is our collision uh, like that. And if and by default, we are actually hiding this geometry from the viewport. So the geometry still goes with this geometry. We are just using the visibility SOP, where we basically select this box and hide it. And the hiding of it is done with this group. Basically, Houdini automatically creates it 3D hidden primitives group. If you go ahead and let's go ahead and say group node, you connect it to it. And if you go ahead and uh, take a look at these groups, and let's go ahead and copy this group name, uh, co copy this name, and you go ahead and set this group 3D, and if you go ahead and enable it, you can see Houdini automatically hid it from the viewport. So the geometry is still there. It's basically it's just the visualization sake. It has hidden it, and this is the same thing that happens here. Even though we cannot see it, the geometry, the collision does come with this geometry down the stream. You can always view it if you go ahead and say group delete, and if you go ahead and say okay, delete the hidden primitives group, you can see our collision now is visible. So the idea is that for the demonstration sake, I'm actually going to delete this geometry because I'm not basically because since I'm not doing any basically any checking when since I'm not using like an HDA to before importing deleting like this group, this collision wouldn't be recognized because it would be a 3D hidden primitives group. So for demonstration sake, I'm going to just delete it. But if you're going to use something like an HDA that you can let's say like I use like a toggle that says okay, delete this group, then you do not have to worry about that. But since I'm not using it, since I want to demonstrate this right Unreal Attributes node for the custom collision, I'm going to delete this group. Let's go ahead and save it on disk. And let's go back to the Unreal Engine. Let's see our player collisions and let me re-import the mesh. And you can see our collision now has been applied here as this collision, basically this weird collision. It doesn't really make any sense, but that's fine for demonstration's sake. Now this is good if your geometry is fine with the simple box collision, basically where the collision has been basically the simple shape is sufficient enough for the collision. But let's say you want your collision to be with multiple pieces, which basically talks about here. So let's say you have like a window frame or something that you want to go through this geometry. The default is not going to work. It talks about how you have to set up these collision simple with the suffix basically with different indices to basically set these so that the collision overall wouldn't be like a merge together and shrink wrap together. Because let's go back to Houdini and let's say my collisions are actually these two boxes. Let's go ahead and let's put this collision maybe here. And if I go ahead and say, okay, I want this to be my collision, let's go ahead and merge it and connect it inside here. Now let's go ahead and save it to disk. Let's go to the Unreal Engine and let's re-import it. And you can see that this is not going to be two different collision pieces. It's going to be kind of like a shrink wrapped around with both of these, and this is not great. So this is where we have to use our prefixes. suffixes for the groups. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and go to the right-hand attribute. I'm going to use connectivity, and for the connectivity, I'm going to use, basically we can use either as an attribute connectivity or basically connectivity, which is basically the uniform different pieces. And if you go ahead and use it like that, you will see that now both pieces has been marked with the suffix 1 and 2 groups. And if you go ahead and save it like that now, let's go back to Houdini, Unreal, let's re-import it. And you can see right now we have our collision has been made for the same geometry with the two geometry pieces. So this is how we can create geometry that is custom geometry with this tool. Another way that we can set up our custom collision is by sourcing from our original mesh. So this is kinda maybe a little bit better way if you, let's say, if you want to, in this case it wouldn't really be necessary, but let's say you want your collision to be based on the connectivity of your geometry. In this case, let's say you have like these boards, and I want to, for each one of them, I want its own basically separate wrap box around it. So how we can do that? So that's a little bit more trickier. So what we have to do is, first of all, we cannot use, in this case, we cannot use our original. Basically, we cannot apply these collision groups to the original geometry and basically without the custom geometry, because in my experience, it would create multiple static mesh components. So basically, by each collision piece that we would generate on our original geometry, it would actually create multiple static mesh components, and it would not bake out as its own one single static mesh. And to showcase it, let me go ahead and say write collision. Let's say apply collisions to the groups, use connectivity, and use connectivity inside here. So in this case, you can see that we do not generate any new geometry. You can see that this group doesn't exist. But if you go ahead and save it on disk, let's go to Unreal Engine. Let's go ahead and re-import. You will see that only one board has been imported. Inside Unreal Engine, you can see that even material has not been applied for some reason. I'm not really sure, but you can see basically this method does not work like that, but we should have our collision. So you see we have our one collision for this piece. So to get in the entire geometry, so to create our collision from the original geometry, what we have to is go ahead and copy this geometry. So this is where the second input of the node comes in handy. New collision geometry from input geometry. So I'm going to use again collision geo simple. I'm going to go ahead and preview collision. So the preview collision, you can see in this case, I'm using the collision going to be same as our original geometry, input geometry. And to save place on disk, what you can do is go ahead and poly reduce this, let's say to the 5%. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be still a simple box collision. And to make more space on disk, what you could do is, since it's going to basically wrap around the basic shape, we do not need entirely the high resolution mesh to sample our collision from that. So what you do is go ahead and say reduce poly count, and then you go ahead and say connectivity, and basically that's it. And if you take a look at if you delete this hidden group, you can see that our collisions kind of intersect with each other. But if you go ahead and save it, let's go to Unreal Engine. Let's re-import it. And you can see we have our entire geometry has been imported under the one static mesh. And if you go to let's go to the player collision, you can see each piece has its own collision piece set up. So this is how we can get around creating different pieces from original geometry collisions based on the original geometry. So that's another trick to go. And you can also use the attribute. So let's go to here. Remember that I place my piece attribute, where I have 3 boards in one group and 3 in another one. In this case, I'm going to use the connectivity by attribute, and I use the piece attribute as its connectivity. Let's save to disk. Let's go back to the Unreal. Let's say player collision, re-import the mesh. You can see in this case, I'm using the piece attribute to wrap around each piece like that. So these are not the only collisions that are available. So if you go to the here, there's a bunch of collisions, and sadly I had pretty bad luck with the simple box, sphere, and capsule collisions. They sometimes work, sometimes did not, so I didn't include them into the menu option. They basically crash the Unreal Engine, Houdini Unreal Engine, so I didn't include them, but you can easily replicate these collisions by using the second input of the geometry if you really need them. And these collisions are basically mirrored options from the static mesh option inside here. If you go to the collisions, you can see there's these basically projected collisions, X, Y, and Z, and there's also these DOP collisions, basically kind of like wrap around geometry, chamfered geometry around. We can talk a lot about collisions inside Unreal Engine and all of that, but these basic setups should get you started. And if you want your other attributes, other things that you want to set up, you can go ahead and do that also. So that's how we can write our collisions. Another important part is Unreal properties. So if you go to the help page, and if you go ahead and say properties, we can basically, it talks about how we can set generic properties, basically generic properties once we have imported our geometry in. So in this case, you can imagine that if you go to the Unreal Engine and your static mesh has been already imported, and let's say by default, you can see the nanite has not been enabled. So it would be nice that we could automatically set up basically say that nanite should be automatically imported. So how can we do that? We have to use another tab inside this node called Unreal Properties. And these are always going to be, I think the properties can always be basically the detail type or a point. So what you could do is go ahead and say I want to enable nanite, and there's basically by default I have my enable nanite support menu and also collision complexity trace flag. Or in this case I want to enable nanite, and I know that this is an integer, basically the toggle, and I want to put it as a 1. And you can see that the label has been the label has been cut out because I'm not in a full screen. But you can see that properties actually be enabled. It's not really talking about this value that we actually write in the detail attribute. It does not really talk about nanite, enable nanite. It's just a be enabled. And this is again where we go to the help file, and it talks about what kind of a properties and what value we have to set it up inside Houdini for it to recognize it to set that parameter, that property up. You see that we can basically say, go to the output log, in the CMD, type Houdini dump generic attribute, and then the type that you want. And again, it talks about Houdini, basically all the properties that are supported to be set by Houdini engine, we can get from writing these console available inside Unreal Engine. Let's go here and paste inside, and you go to the output log. We should get something like this, and I have already pasted inside here. Basically, I went ahead and copied all of this, and this is all the properties that can be set up on the static mesh inside here. And the easiest way for you to find the exact name that you should set your property from is by searching it by the label. So let's say enable nanite. Let's go ahead and search for this property. If you go ahead and search for the nanite, you can see that these nanite settings are actually in a struct called mesh nanite setting. So this is why the name that we have to set on our properties is a little weird because the actual name is taken from this struct inside it. You can see that Boolean property be enabled nanite, which is basically this parameter. We have to write it as a be enabled. So that's why actually we are writing be enabled on the static for this mesh, so that Nana is going to be enabled automatically. But you can basically search for any of these properties and see if these are actually basically if these are supported to be set up by Houdini engine. So let's go ahead and save our be enabled. Let's save the disk. And what I'm going to do is open up this, and let's go ahead and re-import this mesh. And this property should now automatically be enabled. You can see nanite has been automatically set up as true because we set it up as U property inside this node. So what else? So we can also delete attributes, and basically delete attributes is going to be a very last operation that you do. So basically all the attributes that you have set up through here can also be deleted at the end if you want them to be. So that's already like a last. And all of these operations are actually done in the order. And one last thing that I didn't talk about is this post-based attributes, which is the ability to construct Unreal Instance attribute. So this is a very specific idea, or the very specific idea that you can do through this node. Is basically setting up Unreal Instance attributes, which are always combination of the output name and the bake folder attribute. Basically, we can create a couple of points and create and add and create our Unreal Instance attribute. That's going to be, then the HDA is going to automatically instantiate this geometry inside the level. So let me go ahead and quickly showcase you how it works. And to showcase the post-based attribute setup, I have basically went ahead and created a simple point and transferred the two attributes that actually create the Unreal Instance attribute, usually, which is Unreal Bake folder and Unreal Output name. So idea is that we have these two attributes on our points, and if you go ahead and put down the right Unreal attributes again, and you say post attribute base, let's say construct Unreal Instance. It's basically automatically, if it finds these two attributes, it's going to automatically create this Unreal Instance attribute, which is path, basically the bake folder plus the static mesh name path. It's going to be automatically set up. If you do not want it automatically, if you have it in different attributes, you can go ahead and start selecting the path and the name attributes separately. But for the automatic, since I have these two attributes, I'm going to just say automatic. In this case, I just went ahead and copied it 6 times and just save it on disk. In this case, I cannot drag the geometry inside the content browser because this is just instance geometry and it should be in the level, not in the content browser. So you have to use the digital asset. And what I did is just went ahead and put down a Houdini v1.0 import HDA, which comes with the Houdini engine, which is just a wrapper around the file node inside Houdini, inside Unreal Engine. And you can just point to the point cloud that you just saved out on the disk. And it should basically automatically pick it up. This point cloud should be automatically picked up, and the geometry should be called instance static mesh components. And all the instances should be inside here in the S6 array elements, like here. And that's basically it. That's where the post base attribute tab is used for. So basically, because it's called post base, because all the attributes that you have set up inside here will be also available inside here. Basically, these drop-down menus will be populated with the attributes that you have set it inside here. So that's why I called it post-base attribute. So, but that's basically it. Covers the main features of the node. And it can definitely be improved and expanded upon. And as I'm going to use it in the future, I'm sure it's going to be updated also in the future. But that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you next time.